We're finishing out chapter 8 today, starting with verse 15. The vision continues for Daniel. Now he's standing in the citadel, a fortified palace, when suddenly there stood what looked like a man. But we find out that is actually the angel Gabriel. Now primarily, Gabriel seems to be the messenger angel. We know in the New Testament, for instance, it was Gabriel that appeared to Mary. It was Gabriel that appeared to Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. So here, again, Gabriel appears with a message from God. Now Daniel also hears a voice, and well, we're assuming that is the voice of God. Maybe like the voice of God rang out of the heavens when Jesus was baptized. But this voice, like in the baptism of Jesus in the river Jordan, came out of the river. This river was the river Ulai. Well, why a river? Earlier, I talked about the contrast of the citadel, which is a man-made structure, versus the river, which is a God-made living, not structure. It's a living, moving, life-giving kind of thing. And so the voice coming out of the river maybe just means that it is meant to be understood that it's God's voice because God created that river, while Daniel stood in what represented the empire and the strength of men. But also I think that a river can represent time. And we talk about rivers that way in song and in poems, that the rivers stand the test of time, that the currents of time just go by us. Time waits for no man, neither does the current of a river. So like the current of a river, it kind of represents time. And why would I think that maybe that river could represent time? Because the central subject of the conversation that Daniel has with Gabriel is what time will these things happen? Well, first of all, throughout the chapter, we find out that indeed what we thought was true about the image of the goat and the ram is indeed true. Gabriel reveals the truth that the ram with two horns, one larger than the other, does in fact represent the Medo-Persian Empire, with the Persian Empire being stronger. The goat that comes with the single horn does indeed represent the Empire of Greece, and Alexander the Great was the point of the spear, so to speak, and the phalanx that marched across the part of the world where Daniel was located and into Israel and even to North Africa in Egypt. And then indeed, Daniel learns from Gabriel that that horn is broken off, and then the four that come forth are the four kingdoms in which Alexander's empire was sectioned off. So in this passage, what is kind of the central question? Well, it's what Gabriel says in verse 17. Look at it. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, "Understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end." Well, that throws a curveball in it, doesn't it? The end of what? The end of time? Well, time didn't stop whenever Antiochus Epiphanes died. The end of the exile? No. The exile, at least in terms of Nehemiah and Ezra leading the Jews back to Jerusalem, well, that happened long before Antiochus Epiphanes. What it's referring to must be the end of the specific era in which Gabriel is speaking regarding Greece, Medo-Persia, but especially Antiochus Epiphanes that we talked about yesterday. So when he says the time of the end, specifically in the historical context, he's talking about when Antiochus Epiphanes dies. And it's interesting, if I have my dates correct, Antiochus Epiphanes started ruling, I think, in 174 BC. He entered into the temple to offer swine's flesh, 169 BC, and then he died about 6 years later in 163. So the time that's foretold in verse 14, a little over 6 years, that is really pretty accurate to Antiochus Epiphanes. And then there was a time of Jewish independence. So what Gabriel is referring to here in its historical context is there is an end to the time when Antiochus is desecrating the temple and persecuting God's people. But do we have to leave it there? Now that gets into what I talked about yesterday that I learned in college from Walter Kaiser. That these prophetic words are given in a way that speak to the immediate context, but there's also a spiritual context where it's applied metaphorically, and then there's the ultimate context, which it is applied one final time in the future. So when I read a passage like this, I have no problem visiting each one of those applications. We just talked about the historical application, but what's this say in terms of the spiritual application? Remember also that I said one way to think about these prophecies is like a play that is written. It's a script. But this script can be played out by many different actors at many different times in history in many different theaters. And so maybe there's something here like that. And it would appear to me that what is like that is that oftentimes there is an enemy of God that rises up, and it appears as though that enemy of God, which is satanic, Luciferian, actually wins for a season. Seems like they're winning. In fact, when you watch movies, you see that all the time, right? There's a bad guy, there's a good guy. And there's always this section in the movie, and that's the most frustrating part, isn't it? Where the bad guy's winning, where there's injustice and cruelty, and it isn't right. But then, a movie that ends well is a movie where the hero actually destroys the bad guy. Well, why do we watch those movies? Like I just described every Avenger movie that you've ever seen, every superhero movie that's out there, like every one of them. There's a good guy, there's a bad guy. The bad guy looks like he's winning, but the good guy wins in the end. Now, there's movie makers that actually, they tip that on its head just to make us frustrated and have a sensation, a feeling that we don't enjoy, and that's their purpose. But we love the movies where the bad guy loses and the good guy wins. But there's a time in that show where it looks like the bad guy is winning. And why do we enjoy those movies? Why do we watch the same plot over and over and over and over again? Because that's how life is. That's an accurate portrayal of life. Sometimes it looks like Satan is winning, but he's not. The voice is coming up out of the river, and the angel of God is standing there to bring the message to us. The angel of God represents he who protects Israel. The message here is that his days are numbered. The bad guy has his days numbered. And God is victorious. And everything the enemy means for evil, God means for good. And I think that ultimately, if we visit that ultimate application of these and other type of prophetic passages, I believe there's going to be one final, ultimate time when a Luciferian, satanic, demon, possessed leader comes against God and his people one final time before the end comes. So yes, what did he mean in verse 17? That the vision refers to the time of the end? Yeah, the time of the end historically, the time of the end metaphorically, when this script is played out in many different theaters by many different actors, including our own personal lives, and then ultimately. And to me, that makes sense of a lot of these passages.